Imagine a night so still, so thick with shadow, that every sound, every flicker of light could be something not of this world. In 1955, a family in rural Kentucky faced small, glowing figures circling their farmhouse, moving strangely, watching silently, leaving only questions behind. On Night Whisper, we step inside these moments of wonder and fear, exploring mysteries that linger long after the night ends. Subscribe now, because some stories, Dan the Fae there, at dawn, they follow you, softly, into the quiet of your own mind. And here, we listen together. Chapter 1. The evening that didn't feel different. There are some evenings that arrive so gently, so quietly, that no one notices them settling in. And yet, years later, people will say that everything began there. It was late summer in 1955, in a stretch of rural Kentucky where the land rolled wide and open beneath an enormous sky, the kind of place where fences leaned a little with age, where gravel roads hummed beneath passing tires, and where night did not glow with city lights. It deepened. It thickened. It became something you could almost hold in your hands. The farmhouse stood alone in a patch of worn earth and tall grass. 3 small rooms, no electricity humming in the walls, no television murmuring in the background, no telephone waiting to ring. When darkness came here, it came honestly. That Sunday evening felt like countless others before it. Inside the house, voices rose and fell in easy rhythm. A chair scraped softly across wooden floorboards. Someone laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from being among people who know you well. A pot simmered earlier that night. The scent of food still lingered faintly in the warm air. Glennie Langford, the matriarch of the household, moved through the small space with practiced familiarity. Life had not been easy for her, but it had been steady. She understood routine. She understood resilience. Around her were her children and grown sons, daughters-in-law and visiting relatives. 11 souls gathered beneath one modest roof. There is something comforting about a full house. Children darted in and out, bare feet tapping against wood. Adults spoke of small things, travel plans, weather, ordinary concerns that felt important in their time. No one sensed that the world beyond their fields might be preparing to lean closer. Outside, the August air pressed gently against the land. Crickets stitched their endless song into the twilight. The sky, still faintly washed with the last colors of sunset, stretched wide and unbroken above the trees. If you had stood there that evening, you might have felt only stillness. But sometimes, stillness is not emptiness. Sometimes, it is anticipation. Billy Ray Taylor, visiting from out of state with his wife June, stepped outside to fetch water from the well. It was a simple task, a quiet moment away from the chatter inside. The rope creaked as he lowered the bucket. The well answered with its hollow echo. He paused. Not because anything was wrong, just because the sky above him felt large. Have you ever looked up and suddenly become aware of how small you are beneath it? The horizon stretched in every direction without interruption. No skyscrapers, no traffic lights, only tree line and open darkening blue. The world, in that moment, felt vast and calm. Inside the house, someone called out casually. A child giggled. A screen door shifted slightly in its frame. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. And yet, this was the final breath of ordinary. It is strange how life works that way. The biggest turning points rarely announce themselves with thunder. They slip in quietly, disguised as routine. At that time in America, the sky carried its own weight of meaning. The Cold War lingered like an invisible shadow. Newspapers spoke of rockets and satellites. The word atomic drifted through conversations with equal parts pride and fear. People had begun to look upward more often, not with wonder alone, but with caution. Still, in a place like Kelly, Kentucky, global tensions felt distant. The land grounded you. The soil demanded attention. Crops did not grow faster because of international politics. Out here, night was simply night. Billy Ray adjusted his grip on the rope and let his eyes wander across the fading light above. There is a moment just before darkness settles fully, when colors blur and shapes soften, when imagination becomes more active than reason. What would you think, standing there alone, if something unexpected moved across that sky? Would you dismiss it immediately? Or would your heart beat just a little faster? Inside, Glennie likely checked on the younger children. Lucky Sutton and J.C. Sutton, her grown sons, might have been mid-conversation, unaware that outside, the air had shifted by the smallest degree. The dog lay somewhere near the porch, breathing steadily. The farmhouse itself seemed at peace. Wood settling floorboards holding memory. Windows reflecting the last faint glow of dusk. No one inside could know that before the night ended, that same house would feel less like shelter and more like a fragile boundary between the known and the unknown. But for now, everything remained gentle. The kind of gentle that lulls you, the kind that invites you to lower your guard. It is easy, years later, to search for signs, to ask whether someone sensed something unusual in the air, but memory reshapes itself around outcome. In truth, most extraordinary events begin without warning. They begin in kitchens, in fields, at wells. They begin in ordinary conversations. If you could step back into that evening and walk slowly through the house, you would see nothing remarkable. A family gathered. A warm night, a sky preparing to darken, and yet just beyond the tree line, beyond the edge of routine perception, the world was not entirely still. Sometimes the unknown does not rush toward us. Sometimes it waits patiently for us to look up. The farmhouse lights, oil lamps casting their soft glow, flickered gently as moths tapped against the glass. The children's energy began to settle into sleepiness. One of the adults stretched, perhaps thinking of the drive home planned for the next day. It was an evening designed to be forgotten. But destiny does not always choose dramatic settings. It often chooses humble ones. There is something deeply human about what would unfold here. Not just fear or confusion, but the fragile moment when belief collides with experience. And that collision does not begin with terror. It begins with a glance upward. Outside, the rope of the well tightened in Billy Ray's hands. The sky deepened, and somewhere in that widening darkness, something prepared to cross the horizon, not loudly, not violently, but clearly enough to be remembered for the rest of their lives. If you listen closely, you can almost feel the pause before it happens, that breathe between normal and unforgettable. Because once something moves across that sky, nothing inside the farmhouse will feel quite the same again, and the night, once simple and familiar, will begin to unfold in ways no one gathered there could have imagined. And just beyond the quiet well, the sky was about to answer his gaze. Chapter 2. The light over the well. The sky did not roar. It did not split open. It simply moved. Billy Ray Taylor would later search for the right words, but in that first second, language did not matter. The rope of the well rested in his hands, rough against his palms, the bucket swaying slightly in the dark hollow below. He had stepped outside for something simple, water for the house, a brief breath of cooler air, and instead, the heavens shifted. A streak of brightness tore silently across the sky. Not like lightning, not like a plane. It glided, a white-hot glow with a faint tail of color trailing behind it. Almost green, almost silver, sliding across the darkness as if it belonged there. No engine noise followed. No thunder rolled afterward. It simply crossed the horizon and vanished beyond the tree line. Billy Ray did not drop the rope. He did not shout immediately. He just stood there, eyes lifted, heart ticking louder than it had moments before. Have you ever seen something so unexpected that your mind refuses to react right away, as if your thoughts need a second to catch up to your eyes? He blinked. The sky returned to its deep blue calm, stars beginning to pierce through. Crickets continued their steady rhythm. The world had not exploded. Nothing else seemed disturbed. Maybe it was nothing, he might have told himself. A shooting star. People see those all the time. Yet something about the way it moved, steady, deliberate, controlled, pressed against him. In a way ordinary meteors do not. It had not fallen. It had traveled. He leaned slightly forward, scanning the horizon, waiting for another flash. None came. Inside the farmhouse, laughter drifted through the thin walls. Someone shifted a chair. A child asked a question. Life continued. Billy Ray slowly pulled the bucket upward, water sloshing softly against the sides. The ordinary sound felt grounding, solid, real. He carried the water back toward the porch, but he paused once more before stepping inside. He looked up again. The sky now appeared untouched, but his chest held a quiet tremor. When he opened the screen door, the hinges gave their familiar squeak. Conversations paused for a moment as he stepped in. "You all ever see something strange in the sky around here?" he asked, casual in tone, perhaps more casual than he felt. Lucky Sutton glanced up. "Strange how?" Billy Ray described it simply. "A bright object. Moving fast. No sound." Some shrugged. Late August often brought meteor showers. The Kappa Cygnets were known to pass through around that time, though none of them used that name in conversation. Shooting stars weren't unusual. Probably just a meteor, someone offered. Maybe it was, but meteors fall. This had crossed. The room settled again. Conversation resumed. A child yawned. Glennie Langford adjusted a lamp wick slightly, brightening the small halo of light in the center of the room. Still, something had changed. Not in the air exactly, but in perception. Now everyone knew that something had passed overhead, and when the mind is given a new possibility, it holds on to it. Billy Ray sat down, but his attention drifted. His ears seemed sharper. The ordinary creaks of wood carried more weight. The night outside felt closer to the windows than it had before. It is strange how quickly imagination awakens once it is invited. If you are told nothing unusual is happening, your world feels steady. But when someone says, "I saw something," the darkness gains depth. Have you ever noticed how the night feels different after a story is told? The dog shifted outside. At first, no one thought much of it. Farm dogs bark. They chased raccoons. They warn of passing animals, but this bark did not follow its usual pattern. It came sharp, urgent, sustained. Billy Ray and Lucky exchanged a glance. There is a kind of communication that passes between men without words. A subtle tightening of posture. A shared awareness that something might require attention. The barking grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Silence followed. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that listens back. Inside, the younger children grew quieter, sensing the change in the adults' energy, even if they did not understand it. Glennie's gaze shifted toward the door. The lamplight flickered slightly as a faint draft moved through the room. Lucky rose from his chair slowly. "Let us take a look." Billy Ray stood too. They reached for their firearms, not out of aggression, but out of habit. Rural families often kept protection nearby for coyotes, for snakes, for whatever wandered too close. The screen door creaked again as they stepped onto the porch. The night felt thicker now. The sky had darkened fully. Stars scattered across it in brilliant clarity. Without city lights, the heavens seemed almost overwhelming, endless, and intimate at the same time. The dog had retreated beneath the house. That was unusual. Dogs chase. Dogs confront. They do not hide without reason. Lucky called out softly. No response. Billy Ray's eyes scanned the tree line. At first, he saw only shadow layered upon shadow. The trees stood still. No wind moved through them. Then something shifted. A faint movement near the edge of the woods. He squinted. Perhaps it was the way the lamplight from the house reached only part way into the yard, creating a boundary between glow and darkness. Perhaps his eyes were still adjusting, but there, just beyond the fence, something reflected. Two small points of light. Not like a flashlight beam, more like eyes catching illumination. Billy Ray felt his breath slow. It could be an animal, he told himself. Of course it could. Raccoons have reflective eyes. Owls do too. Still, the height seemed wrong. The reflection appeared higher than a raccoon would stand, lower than a man. It moved. Not in the darting way animals do. Not scurrying, not bounding. It advanced slowly, and as it stepped closer into the thin wash of lamplight spilling from the house, shapes began to form around those glowing eyes. Small, upright, arms extended slightly from its sides. Billy Ray felt the ground anchor him in place. The world narrowed to that figure. The crickets continued. oblivious. His mind raced to categorize what he was seeing. Animal. No child. Impossible. Something else. Lucky whispered something. Perhaps a name. Perhaps just a breath shaped like a word. The figure tilted its head. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, as if it had all the time in the world. And in that suspended moment, Billy Ray realized something deeply unsettling. Whatever stood there was not behaving like a frightened creature. It was observing them. His finger tightened instinctively around the trigger. The night, once gentle and predictable, now held a presence that refused easy explanation. Was it fear guiding his perception? Was the earlier light in the sky coloring what he now believed he saw? The mind connects patterns quickly, sometimes too quickly. But in that moment, there was no time for analysis. Only instinct. Only the awareness that something stood at the edge of their yard that did not belong to any category they knew. And that awareness spread like a ripple back. Toward the farmhouse door, toward Glennie, toward the children, toward the warm room that moments ago had felt entirely safe. Inside, someone called, softly, "What is it?" Billy Ray did not answer immediately, because he did not yet know. The small figure shifted again, stepping fully into view. And the night, once white and empty, suddenly felt occupied. What stepped forward from the tree line would change the way they remembered this evening forever. Chapter 3. The figures at the tree line. There is a moment, just before fear takes hold, when the world feels suspended, as if it is waiting for you to decide what it is. The small figure at the edge of the yard did not rush forward. It did not leap or snarl or make a sound. It simply stood there, framed by darkness, as though the night itself had shaped it and set it gently on the grass. Billy Ray's breath thinned in his chest. Lucky Sutton shifted beside him, boots pressing into the dry earth of the yard. The lamplight spilling from the farmhouse door reached only halfway across the clearing. Beyond that line, the world dissolved into shadow, and in that shadow stood something that did not fit. It was small, no more than 3.5 feet tall. Its head appeared rounded, almost too large for its narrow shoulders. Its arms hung unusually long, nearly reaching its knees. The hands, if they were hands, seemed to curve slightly at the ends, but it was the eyes that held them. They caught the light and returned it in a steady yellow glow. Not blinking, not darting, just watching. Have you ever locked eyes with something in the dark and felt your body decide before your mind does? Billy Ray felt his heartbeat rise into his throat. His fingers tightened around the rifle. He did not want to shoot. Not truly. He wanted the shape to resolve into something familiar. An owl, a trick of perspective, a neighbor playing some foolish prank. But the longer he stared, the less it resembled anything he recognized. It moved. Not quickly, not cautiously either. It drifted forward with a strange buoyancy, as though the ground held less weight for it than it did for him. Its arms lifted slightly, almost as if balancing against an unseen current. Lucky raised his firearm fully now. "Stop," he muttered under his breath, though whether to himself or to the figure, even he might not have known. The being tilted its head to one side. The motion was curious, almost inquisitive. Inside the house, a child's voice called again, softer this time. "What is it?" Glennie stood behind the screen door, peering past the men, trying to make sense of the shapes beyond the light. Billy Ray made a decision that would echo for decades. He fired. The crack of the shot shattered the night. Birds startled from distant trees. The echo rolled outward across the fields. The figure reacted instantly, flipping backward in a motion that looked almost mechanical, almost weightless. It tumbled once and disappeared into shadow near the fence line. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Charged silence. Lucky blinked. "You hit it." "I know I hit it," Billy Ray replied, though uncertainty threaded his voice. They waited. No cry of pain, no scramble through brush, no sign of injury. Just crickets resuming their steady chorus, as if nothing unusual had occurred. The two men stepped forward cautiously, boots brushing through grass. The yard smelled faintly of gunpowder now, sharp and metallic. They reached the fence. Nothing. No body, no blood, No disturbed earth beyond what their own boots had caused. Billy Ray crouched, scanning the ground carefully. He expected at least some trace, some sign that the bullet had struck flesh. Instead, he found only darkness. Behind them, the farmhouse door creaked wider. Glennie called out more firmly now. What happened? Lucky turned slightly. Something was there. Something. The word felt inadequate. Before they could step back toward the porch, movement flickered above them. A faint scratching sound came from the roof. They both froze. The roof. Billy Ray slowly lifted his gaze. There, outlined against the faint starlight, another small shape crouched at the edge of the house, its head turned toward them. The glowing eyes flashed again. How could it be on the roof? They had just seen one near the fence. Was it the same? Was there more than one? The shape leaned forward, peering down over the gutter with unsettling calm. Lucky fired this time. The blast rang upward, splintering a section of gutter. The figure rolled backward and vanished from view, as if sliding off the roof. A metallic sound echoed briefly. A faint ping like metal struck against metal. Billy Ray felt confusion pressed harder than fear now. Metal? Had his bullet struck something solid? The dog whimpered beneath the house. Inside, the children had begun to cry quietly. Vera and Aileen gathered them closer, whispering reassurances that felt thin even to their own ears. The sense of safety inside the farmhouse shifted. The walls, once comforting, now felt fragile. The windows no longer framed a peaceful yard. They framed possibility. Lackey and Billy Ray retreated toward the porch slowly, scanning every direction. And that was when they saw another. This one appeared near a tree trunk, halfway between the yard and the woods. Its posture mirrored the first upright, arms slightly lifted. The same oversized head, the same luminous eyes. It did not charge. It did not flee. It watched. The men stepped backward onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath their weight. Inside, Glennie's face had gone pale in lamplight. How many are there? Billy Ray did not answer immediately, because he did not know. Over the next hour, though, time would lose its normal meaning. The figures reappeared again and again. At windows, near the porch, peering from branches. Each time they approached with the same deliberate calm. Each time a shot rang out. Each time the figures seemed to absorb impact and retreat without visible harm. At one point, one of them extended its long arm toward a window screen, its claw-like fingers curling around the frame. Lucky fired through the screen, tearing fabric and wood. The being drifted backward, flipping in that same unnatural arc before vanishing. Children sobbed softly in the corner of the room. The adults tried to steady their breathing, tried to maintain control. Lamps were repositioned, curtains drawn tighter. Have you ever experienced a night that refused to end? Minutes stretched. Sounds amplified. Every scrape of branch against roof sounded deliberate. Around them, the Kentucky countryside remained otherwise undisturbed. No distant sirens, no neighbors rushing over. Just the small farmhouse, illuminated like an island in darkness. At one point, Billy Ray whispered something almost to himself. They don't act scared. That realization lingered heavily. Animals flee when shot at. Pranksters shout or run. But these figures returned. Again and again, as if curious, as if studying. The emotional weight inside the house deepened. Fear mingled with disbelief. Could 11 people truly be seeing the same thing? Was adrenaline reshaping perception? Was the earlier light in the sky connecting itself to this moment in their minds? Or were they facing something genuinely unknown? The clock ticked slowly toward 11 p.m. Finally, exhaustion began to mix with dread. They could not remain trapped inside all night. The children needed relief. The adults needed help. Loki lowered his rifle. We're going to town. It felt like surrender. It felt like survival. They gathered quickly. Children wrapped in blankets. Wives moving swiftly but carefully. The porch creaked under hurried steps. As they climbed into cars, Billy Ray cast one last glance toward the tree line. Two faint glimmers stared back from the darkness. Not advancing. Not retreating. Just present. The engines roared to life, headlights cutting twin beams across the yard. Gravel crunched beneath tires as they pulled away from the farmhouse, and as the vehicles disappeared down the rural road toward Hopkinsville, the small house stood once again alone beneath the enormous Kentucky sky. Quiet, still, as if nothing at all had happened. But inside each of those cars, hearts pounded with the same question. What had stepped out of the trees that night, and why had it refused to leave? Chapter 4. The Drive into Town. The road to Hopkinsville had never felt so long. Gravel snapped beneath the tires as the two cars hurried through the dark countryside, headlights carving narrow tunnels through the night. Dust lifted behind them in pale clouds, briefly visible in the beams before dissolving back into blackness. Inside the first car, Glennie Langford held one of the younger children close. The child's small fingers clutched the fabric of her dress tightly, as though letting go might allow the night itself to slip inside. No one spoke for several moments. The engine hummed. The tires rolled. Breath moved in shallow rhythm. Billy Ray drove, eyes fixed on the road, but his thoughts refused to stay steady. He replayed the image again and again. The small, upright figure, the gleaming eyes, the unnatural way it had flipped backward when struck. He had hunted before. He knew how animals reacted to gunfire. He knew the weight and resistance of a body-absorbing impact. That had not been the same. In the car behind them, Lucky gripped the steering wheel firmly, jaw tight. He had grown up in these fields. He understood every sound rural land could make at night. Owls, foxes, stray dogs, wind through tin roofs. But what he had seen on that roof did not settle into any category he knew, and it was not just him. 11 people had witnessed it. That detail pressed heavily. If fear can distort perception, could it distort it identically for everyone? The headlights caught the edge of a fence post, then another. Trees swept past in blurred silhouettes. Somewhere in the distance, a lone farmhouse light flickered faintly. Another family living an ordinary night, unaware that a story was speeding past them on the road. One of the children asked quietly, "Are they coming with us?" No one answered immediately. Glennie stroked the child as a hair. "Timothy, we're going somewhere safe," she said softly. Safe. The word felt fragile. By the time the cars reached the Hopkinsville police station, the clock neared 11 p.m. The building stood modest and solid under streetlights. Brick walls, glass windows reflecting the quiet town. Inside, officers moved at an unhurried pace. It had been, until that moment, a routine night. The screen door swung open sharply as the family entered. 11 people stepping into bright fluorescent light. Faces pale. Clothes rumpled. Eyes wide but focused. Chief Russell Greenwell looked up from his desk. At first glance, the group did not resemble pranksters. They were not laughing. They were not wild-eyed or incoherent. They were frightened, but controlled. Lucky spoke first, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "We need help. There are things out at our place." "What kind of things?" one officer asked. Billy Ray hesitated only a second. "Little men." The room fell silent. It is easy, from a distance of decades, to imagine laughter in that moment, but the officers did not immediately mock them. They listened. They asked questions. Where? How many? What do they look like? Had anyone been hurt? As details unfolded, the height, the eyes, the shots fired, the officers exchanged measured glances. Skepticism flickered across faces. Yes, but so did something else. Concern. Because whatever these people had seen, they believed it, and belief strong enough to drive 11 individuals into town in the middle of the night carried weight. Chief Greenwell rose from his chair. "All right," he said calmly. "We'll take a look." Word traveled quickly within the small station. City police, county deputies, even state troopers were notified. Someone contacted military police from nearby Fort Campbell. Within minutes, patrol cars prepared to roll out. As the family stepped back outside, the flashing red lights of police vehicles cut through the quiet streets of Hopkinsville. A small convoy formed authority, moving toward uncertainty. The drive back to the farmhouse felt different now, not isolated, accompanied. Yet tension lingered. What if nothing was there? What if the yard stood empty and still? Would relief come, or embarrassment? Billy Ray sat in the passenger seat this time, staring through the windshield at the sweeping beams of multiple cars ahead. He almost hoped the field would be empty. He almost wanted the officers to laugh and explain everything away. An owl, a trick of light, nerves stretched thin by the earlier meteor. But another part of him resisted that outcome. Because if nothing was there, what had he fired at? The convoy turned onto the rural road. Gravel scattered under multiple tires now. Flashing lights, illuminated fences, trees, and finally, the small farmhouse at the end of the clearing. It stood just as they had left it. Silent. Still. No movement visible from the road. Officers stepped out cautiously, hands near holsters, flashlights cutting wide arcs across the yard. The beams landed on broken window screens. Splintered wood, spent shell casings glinting faintly in the dirt. Evidence of panic. But not evidence of creatures. They spread out carefully. Flashlights swept across the roofline. Along the fence, into the tree line where the first figure had appeared. Nothing moved. The dog emerged slowly from beneath the house, tail-low eyes reflecting the flashlight beams. It did not bark. One officer crouched near the fence line. Any blood? Another shook his head. The metallic ping Billy Ray remembered seemed almost distant now. Had he imagined that detail? Or had adrenaline sharpened certain sounds beyond proportion? They searched the yard thoroughly. At one point, a deputy called attention to faint luminous patches deeper in the woods. Soft glows clinging to rotting wood. Under examination, they identified it as foxfire, a natural bioluminescent fungus known to glow faintly in darkness. Natural. Explainable. Comforting. But foxfire does not walk upright. After nearly an hour of searching, the officers gathered near the porch. Chief Greenwell addressed the family carefully. "We don't see anything unusual right now," he said, "but we'll file a report." His tone remained respectful, and yet the absence of proof hung heavily in the air. The police could not confirm what had been described. They could not deny that shots had been fired, but they could not produce a single creature. Around 2 a.m., the officers began to leave. Flashlights blinked off. Engines started. Red lights faded into distance. The farmhouse returned once more to darkness. For a brief moment, the family considered that perhaps it was over. Perhaps whatever had approached earlier had been frightened away by gunfire and sirens. Exhaustion pressed against them now, heavier than fear. The children dozed in corners. The adults' voices softened. Maybe the night had passed. But around 3:30 a.m., just as fatigue began to dull sharp edges, a faint scratching returned to the roof. Billy Ray's eyes opened instantly. Lucky rose slowly from his chair. They did not need to speak. The sound came again, deliberate, measured. A shadow crossed the window. The figures had returned. The police were gone, and whatever had stepped from the trees earlier in the evening seemed undisturbed by authority, undeterred by gunfire, and entirely unhurried. Billy Ray felt something shift inside him then. Not just fear, but a deeper realization. This night was not ending easily, and morning, when it finally arrived, would not restore what had been lost. Because once you see something that refuses explanation, you cannot simply unsee it. And outside, just beyond the thin wooden walls of the farmhouse, the night continued to watch. Chapter 5. The Night That Would Not End. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that arrives when fear has nowhere left to go. By the time the scratching returned to the roof, the farmhouse no longer felt like a home. It felt like a boundary line. Thin boards and fragile glass standing between. The known and something that refused to be understood. The police cars were gone. Their red lights no longer painted the yard. The echo of official voices had faded down the gravel road. Authority had come, searched, and left with nothing concrete in hand. And now the night had resumed as if uninterrupted. Scratch a slow, dragging sound above the ceiling beams. Billy Ray sat upright in his chair. Across the room, Lucky's eyes met his in the dim lamplight. No words passed between them. None were needed. The children stirred. Vera pulled a blanket closer around one of the younger ones. Glennie rose slowly from where she had been sitting, her joints stiff, not from age alone, but from the tension of hours spent braced for something unseen. Scratch. A faint thud near the edge of the roof. Billy Ray stood, rifle already in his hands. Loki followed. The lamplight flickered as a draft slipped under the door, though no one had opened it. Have you ever noticed how, after a long night, even the smallest sound feels intentional? They stepped carefully toward the door again. The porch creaked under their weight as they emerged into the cool, early morning air. The sky had shifted toward its deepest shade of night, that hour when even stars seemed to hold their breath. Billy Ray lifted his eyes slowly. There near the roofline, a small shape crouched again, outlined faintly against starlight. The same rounded head, the same elongated arms. It did not flee when seen. It leaned forward slightly, peering down. Lucky fired. The blast split the quiet countryside once more. The figure flipped backward in that same unnatural arc, as though hinged at the waist, and disappeared from sight. Billy Ray felt a strange mix of frustration and disbelief. The shots made contact. He was certain of it, and yet there was no collapse, no cry, no evidence left behind. Only absent. Inside the farmhouse, the women and children waited in strained silence. The emotional toll had deepened beyond immediate fear. It had become something heavier, a fatigue woven with confusion. How many are there? June whispered softly. No one answered, because the number did not seem fixed. Another movement flickered near the window. Lucky pivoted and fired again, tearing another hole through the screen. The metallic ping returned faintly. That same brief ringing sound, like striking hollow metal. Billy Ray's pulse quickened. Metal. Why metal? Was it possible they were mishearing, that the echo of gunfire distorted the sound? Or had something truly resisted the bullets? The figure outside the window drifted backward and vanished toward the trees. For the next hour, the pattern repeated. Appear. Observe. Shot. Retreat. At one point, one of the beings extended its arm through a torn section of screen, its long fingers curling around the window frame. Glennie gasped quietly, pulling a child closer, as Lucky fired once more, splintering wood inches from the reaching hand. The figure withdrew with that same strange buoyancy, not running, not scrambling, almost gliding. Time lost its ordinary structure. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The air inside the farmhouse grew stale with tension and gunpowder residue. Outside, the night remained otherwise peaceful. No neighbors approached. No distant dogs barked in alarm. It was as though the entire encounter existed in a small bubble around that one house. Billy Ray felt his thoughts begin to fragment. Was it adrenaline? Was exhaustion distorting what he saw? Could shed fear create shed vision? Yet the consistency remained. Every adult described the same height, the same glowing eyes, the same exaggerated arms. Even the children, peeking cautiously through fingers and blankets, whispered descriptions that matched. Could imagination synchronize so precisely? Around 4:30 a.m., the eastern edge of the sky began to pale, almost imperceptibly. A thin, gray hint pushed against the black horizon. Dawn. The promise of it brought something close to relief. Darkness conceals. Daylight reveals. Surely, when the sun rose, the figures would vanish. Surely, whatever power they held belonged to night alone. The scratching ceased. The yard fell silent again. For several long minutes, nothing moved. Billy Ray lowered his rifle slowly. His arms ached from hours of tension. Lucky exhaled deeply, rubbing his eyes with one hand. Inside, one of the younger children had finally drifted into sleep, exhaustion overcoming fear. Glennie stood near the doorway and looked out across the yard. The fields appeared ordinary again. Fence posts, grass, the familiar tree line. The sky lightened further, and with it, something shifted inside the family. Fear gave way to decision. We're not staying here, Glennie said quietly. The words carried no drama, no raised voice, just certainty. No one argued, The farmhouse had become associated with something they could not explain. Even if the yard now stood empty, even if daylight revealed nothing unusual, the memory of the night clung to the walls. They began to pack quickly. Clothes folded without care. Small belongings gathered into boxers. The children, still groggy, were told they would be leaving for a while. Leaving. The decision felt both sudden and inevitable. If it had been a prank, why return after the police left? If it had been animals, why no tracks? If it had been imagination, why had it lasted so long? Billy Ray stepped outside one last time before climbing into the car. The morning light spread gently across the fields now. Birds began their tentative calls. The farmhouse roof showed damage from gunfire. The window screens hung torn, but the yard itself revealed nothing else. No bodies, no strange footprints, no metallic debris. Only shell casings scattered across the ground, silent witnesses to a night that refused simple explanation. He scanned the tree line carefully. Empty, peaceful, and yet he felt watched. Perhaps it was only memory lingering in his nerves. Perhaps it was the echo of glowing eyes imprinted on his mind. He climbed into the car. Engines started once more. Gravel shifted beneath tires. As the vehicles pulled away from the farmhouse in full daylight, the house appeared smaller than it had hours before. Almost vulnerable, almost fragile against the vast Kentucky landscape. Behind them, the fields stretched wide and ordinary. Ahead of them, waited questions. They did not know that within hours, reporters would descend. That headlines would spread far beyond Christian County. That government files would reduce their experience to a single word. Hoax. In that moment, they were simply a family leaving a house that no longer felt safe. The sun rose fully over the horizon. The night had ended, but the story had just begun. Chapter 6. When the world came knocking. Morning has a way of making even the strangest night feel distant. But for the family driving away from the farmhouse, the sunlight did not erase anything. It only revealed the weight of what had happened. The road stretched ahead, pale dust rising behind their tires. No one spoke for several minutes. The children were unusually quiet. Even the younger ones sensed that something had shifted not just in the house they left behind, but in the rhythm of their lives. Billy Ray kept his eyes on the road. He replayed every moment in his mind. The first scratching, the glowing eyes, the metallic sound. When bullets struck, he tried to fit it into something reasonable. Animals, vandals, shadows amplified by fear. But reason refused to hold its shape. By mid-morning, word had already begun to spread. In small towns, news does not travel slowly. It moves through phone lines, over fences, across store counters and gas pumps. Someone had heard the gunfire. Someone had noticed the police cars arriving in the middle of the night. Someone had asked questions. And questions multiply faster than answers. By the time the family reached a relative's house, reporters were already making calls. Local newspapers, regional radio stations, curious voices asking the same careful questions. Can you describe what you saw? How tall were they? Are you sure they weren't children playing a prank? The family answered cautiously at first. They described the beings exactly as they remembered. Small, almost childlike in height, but not childlike in presence. Large glowing eyes, long arms, a strange, floating movement. Each retelling felt both grounding and surreal. Have you ever told a story that sounds unreal even as you speak it? Yet you know every word is true? By afternoon, cars began appearing near the farmhouse again. Not police this time. Civilians. Curious. Neighbors. Reporters with cameras. The torn window screens were photographed. The shell casings collected. The bullet holes in the roof examined closely. But the yard still held no footprints. No unusual markings. No physical proof of what had moved through that darkness. And so the narrative began to split. Some believed, some doubted. Some laughed. The word hoax entered the conversation quietly at first, then louder. Skeptics suggested attention-seeking, suggested alcohol, suggested hysteria, suggested mass imagination. It is easy, from a safe distance, to explain away someone else's fear. But inside the borrowed living room where the family now sat, the atmosphere felt heavy. They had not asked for headlines. They had not planned for visitors. They had simply wanted the night to end. As reporters gathered outside, Glennie folded her hands together and looked at Billy Ray. "Tell it how it happened," she said softly, and he did. Not dramatically, not embellishing. Just the simple sequence of events. The scratching. The figures. The gunfire. The retreat. The return. Over and over. Each repetition carved the memory deeper, but also steadier. Something interesting happens when many people share the same unusual experience. Their accounts either drift apart or they lock together. The family's stories remained consistent, even under questioning, even when skeptics pressed for contradictions. Lucky described the metallic ping again. The sound he insisted he heard when his bullet struck. A reporter raised an eyebrow. "Metal?" he asked. "That's what it sounded like," Lucky replied. Metal implies technology. Technology implies intelligence, and intelligence implies intention. That possibility unsettled people far more than talk of animals in the yard. By evening, the farmhouse had become a quiet spectacle. Photographers stood near the fence line. Children from nearby homes pointed toward the roof. A few bold individuals approached the tree line, peering into shadows that now held nothing but ordinary woodland stillness. Inside town diners, conversations turned animated. "Did you hear about the little green men?" They say the eyes glowed. "Shot 'em and they didn't fall." Stories evolve quickly once they leave their origin. Details shift, colors change. Green was added, though no one in the family had used that word. Exaggerations crept in, and slowly, what had been a private terror became public folklore. The family felt that transformation in real time. They were no longer simply people. They were becoming a story. Late that evening, after most reporters had left, a representative from the nearby military base reached out quietly. Fort Campbell was not far away. Military training exercises were common in the region. The question hovered unspoken. Could what they saw have been equipment? Experimental craft? Soldiers testing something secret? But the base denied involvement. No drills. No experiments. No personnel missing. Another explanation dissolved. That night, as the family tried to sleep in unfamiliar beds, the silence felt almost louder than the chaos had been. No scratching, no glowing eyes. Only memory. Billy Ray lay awake, staring at the ceiling. What if they returned? What if leaving the farmhouse had only changed location, not intention? He listened carefully for any unusual sound. Nothing came. The children, finally exhausted beyond fear, slept deeply. Glennie sat by the window for a long time, watching moonlight settle across the yard. The sky looked normal again. Peaceful. Indifferent. Yet she could not shake the feeling that something had observed them with equal curiosity. Not hostility. Not attack. Observation. As if the family had been studied as much as they had studied the visitors. The next morning, national newspapers picked up the story. Headlines varied in tone, some playful, some skeptical, some cautiously intrigued. The phrase "little green men" began appearing in print, a catchy label that simplified complexity into something digestible. The family did not like it. What they had seen had not felt playful. It had not felt cartoonish. It had felt real and deeply unsettling. Scientists offered psychological theories. Stress-induced hallucination. Group suggestion. Rural myth-making. All possible, all reasonable from a distance. But explanations built from afar rarely carry the emotional texture of those who stood inside the moment. As days passed, visitors continued arriving at the farmhouse. Some claimed to see lights in the sky. Others reported nothing at all. Gradually, the intensity faded. Reporters moved on to fresher stories. The yard returned to quiet. The bullet holes remained. Time, as it does, began smoothing sharp edges. But within the family, something had permanently shifted. They spoke less about the details, more about the feeling of being watched, the feeling of encountering something beyond their framework, the feeling that the world might be wider than they had imagined. Have you ever had an experience that changed how you look at the sky? For them, every star now carried new weight. Every rustle in the dark invited attention. They had entered a space between certainty and mystery, and once you step there, you do not fully return. Public interest slowly transformed the farmhouse into something else, a landmark, a curiosity, a whispered chapter in local legend. People drove past just to look. Children dared each other to stand near the fence at night, and so the story left the family's control entirely. It moved into culture, into debate, into folklore. But beneath all that noise remained a quieter truth. One night, a family believed they were visited. They responded with fear. They defended themselves. They left their home, and no definitive answer ever arrived. The world had come knocking, and then moved on. But the question stayed behind, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to ask them again. Chapter 7. The Name That Echoed Through Time. There is a peculiar moment when a story stops being just a story. It drifts quietly into memory, carried by voices, newspapers, and retellings at dinner tables and campfires. It grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, until it no longer belongs only to the people who first lived it. It belongs to anyone who dares to listen. In the weeks after that long, humid night in Kentucky, the farmhouse seemed to breathe differently. Its walls held whispers not only from the family who had fled, but from every version of the tale told, every retelling that transformed fear into fascination. Newspapers began to carry pieces of the story across the country. Some presented facts with careful restraint. Others painted the figures with exaggerated eyes, bright colors, often green, though the family had never described them that way. Green. The color clung to the legend, as if the ink itself had given the beings a name. Radio hosts debated the nature of the visitors. Extraterrestrial, experimental, or playful tricksters. Skeptics laughed. Believers leaned closer to the speakers. Hearts quickened with wonder. Little green men became a phrase, a ghost that refused to leave the night, and the town itself, Hopkinsville, began to carry the weight of that name. A quiet Kentucky community, once defined by fields, churches, and familiar routines, now found itself linked to the cosmos. Some residents accepted it lightly. A gentle amusement to others frowned, wishing their home could escape the headlines. Yet the story endured. Investigators arrived, notebooks in hand, pens poised, tape recorders clicking quietly. They asked the family to recount details: height, movement, color, behavior. They measured distances, mapped sight lines, calculated time intervals. They sought not spectacle, but consistency. And they found it. The descriptions remained steady. 3 to 4 feet tall. Round, luminous eyes that reflected light in the darkness. Long, pliable arms that swayed almost like water. A peculiar, gliding motion when retreating. Never aggressive, merely observant, persistent, quietly present. It was the patience of the beings that fascinated the investigators. Why return again and again? Why retreat when met with gunfire? If they were fragile, how could they survive? If they were animals, why linger near loud lights, rattling doors, and the scent of humans? The questions stacked to themselves, gentle yet insistent, forming a lattice of wonder that could not be easily dismantled. Meanwhile, the farmhouse endured. Sun and rain passed over its roof, and still it held silence, absorbing the legend without comment. As time went on, interpretations shifted. Perhaps owls, some suggested. Large, nocturnal, reflective-eyed, wings gliding silently. It was plausible. Darkness bends perception. Fear amplifies shadows. Shapes shimmer and stretch, but the family remembered differently. These figures did not flap. They floated, their arms extended with purpose. When bullets rang out, they flipped backward in the same graceful arc each time. Mechanical, precise. Yet no fragments of metal, no marks, no tracks, just echoes and silence. Sometimes, the absence of proof is its own kind of resonance. The unknown leaves space for imagination. It stretches longer than certainty ever could. Years passed. Children grew. Life moved forward. But the story lingered, suspended between disbelief and wonder, touching new generations who had never stood on that porch, who had never seen those glowing eyes. By the 1960s and 70s, as interest in UFOs swept across America, Hopkinsville's tale reached books, cataloged it. Documentaries mentioned it. It became a cornerstone of modern UFO lore, not because of extraordinary evidence, but because of clarity. Multiple witnesses, consistent testimony, immediate reporting, no financial gain, only exposure to ridicule. Why would a family endure mockery for no reason? That question echoed in classrooms, in libraries, in late-night conversations. It was a question without a tidy answer, and perhaps that made the story endure even more. Decades later, the town began to embrace its unusual legacy. Festivals blossomed, crowds arrived, drawn by curiosity rather than judgment. Artists painted small alien figures smiling on posters. Windows glowed with playful renditions of the night's visitors. The name that had once invited mockery became a badge of identity, a thread woven into local culture. But beneath all the playful imagery, the original experience remained heavy with gravity for those who had been there. When asked to recall the night, family members spoke not of fame or myth, but of feeling. The way silence could feel watchful, the way glowing eyes could hold attention without a sound, the way standing together on the porch, uncertain yet resolute, could become an act of courage. They did not claim to understand. They did not offer explanations. They simply told what they remembered. And in that honesty, the story found its immortality. It did not demand belief. It did not insist on resolution. It simply existed, lingering in the minds of anyone willing to imagine. On quiet nights, when the stars spill across the sky and the wind sighs through trees, some still glance upward, recalling that farmhouse, the light in the dark, the floating shapes, the family, tense yet steadfast, facing the unknown. Was it misperceived animals, experimental devices, or something not yet named? Perhaps that does not matter. Perhaps it is the questions themselves that give the story life. Hopkinsville, a small town where the line between earth and sky blurred for a single long night, where a family glimpsed something extraordinary and returned with nothing but wonder and questions. The name continues to echo, not because it solved anything, but because it whispers to each of us. Sometimes, the world is larger than our understanding, and some stories invite us simply to look up and wonder. And as the legend settled into memory, the next chapter would explore the echoes of that night and the lives of those who lived it, and the generations that followed. Chapter 8. Shadows Between the Trees. The night stretches long over the fields surrounding Kelly, Kentucky. Even decades later, one can almost feel the dense August air, the slow hum of insects, and the way shadows move across the grass under a silvered moon. Imagine standing there, the smell of earth and grass heavy in the warm breeze, the horizon distant and empty, and the feeling that, for a single instant, the world had paused. That pause, that hush, is where our story begins again. It is impossible to think about the Hopkinsville encounter without feeling the weight of space, the space around the farmhouse, the space between the trees, the space in the minds of the family inside. 11 people, each with their own instincts, hopes, and fears, were gathered under a roof held together by nothing more than wood, nails, and kerosene lamps. And outside that roof, something, or some things, waited, moving silently, subtly, in the darkness. Billy Ray Taylor had been the first to notice the strange light, that bright, silvery streak across the sky that left a rainbow-colored trail, almost like a brushstroke of impossible color painted by some cosmic hand. He had told his family, and they had looked up, skeptical yet curious. What could it be? Day one they read, a meteor, a plane, something reflected in the clouds. It was the beginning of the night's unfolding. Then came the dog. Animals are often the first to sense what humans do not, and in this case, the family dog had barked with urgent alarm before retreating beneath the porch. There was no playful chase, no territorial guarding, only the trembling realization that something unusual had arrived. The men stepped outside, firearms ready, hearts pounding against their chests. muscles tense, eyes scanning the blackened tree line. From that tree line, it emerged. Small, not human-sized, but unmistakably sentient in its movements. Large, reflective eyes glimmered in the darkness. Arms extended, elongated and unnerving in their length. Swaying slightly with each step, the creatures moved as though gravity were a suggestion, not a law. Their skin or covering caught moonlight in a metallic sheen, a light that seemed alive and fluid at the edges. The first encounter was brief yet indelible. A gunshot cracked, echoing across the night, but the figure flipped backward, unharmed, retreating into the trees. The sound of the shot did not chase it away. Only curiosity kept it at bay. Time stretched. Hours folded into themselves as the beings appeared again and again. Windows became portals of observation. Roofs became stages for their silent choreography. No growls, no hissing, only the quiet intrusion of presence. Inside, the family barricaded themselves, the children hidden and trembling, adults tense yet alert. Gunfire continued intermittently, punctuating the dark air. Metal meeting whatever material reflected the shots with a sharp, tinny plink. Outside, the creatures circled, moved, paused. They were persistent, yet not threatening. They seemed to test boundaries, probe spaces, explore angles of approach, and then vanish only to return moments later. Observation, not aggression, defined their interaction. Every detail counted: the gentle sway of their gait, the way their arms swung almost independently from gravity, the deliberate pauses at windows, as though trying to understand the lives behind the glass. Inside the house, fear mingled with awe. Have you ever experienced a moment when you are unsure whether to run, to fight, or to stand perfectly still? That is the sensation captured in those long hours, the strange blending of terror and fascination. For the family, each appearance of the beings demanded a decision: stand firm and defend, or flee and surrender their home to the unknown. But even as they acted, memory was forming. Each person perceived the same events through their own lens of emotion and experience. Group dynamics played a subtle role, amplifying reactions, aligning observations, and cementing shared understanding. A single scream could ripple through the household like a pebble in a still pond, altering perception. A sudden movement outside could synchronize fear across multiple hearts, echoing in the minds of adults and children alike. And yet, despite the intensity, clarity remained. Each adult could describe height, posture, glowing eyes, and the peculiar swaying gait. Neighbors, distant and curious, later claimed to have heard sporadic gunfire but far fewer shots than the family reported. Time dilates under fear. Sensory perception bends. Minutes feel stretched. Shadows seem larger. Shapes appear where none exist. It is in this tension between external observation and internal perception that the story's power resides. As hours passed, exhaustion seeped into every muscle. The night, thick and unyielding, became a partner in the family's vigil. They could not see the edges of the fields, could not measure the distance to the trees, could not define the contours of the darkened shapes that lingered just beyond sight. Yet their minds were alive with acute awareness. Every sound, every light reflection, every fleeting motion mattered. By 11 p.m., the decision to leave the farmhouse crystallized. The family piled into vehicles, hearts still racing, adrenaline waning only slightly in the chill night air. They drove toward Hopkinsville, seeking police intervention, validation, or perhaps merely safety. When officers encountered them, they did not encounter pranksters or liars. They met people whose pulses were elevated, whose voices trembled with the residue of fear and uncertainty. Their eyes, wide and searching, reflected the moonlight and the echo of unseen observers. The farmhouse itself became an artifact of absence. Windows held the marks of frantic defense, bullet holes punctuated by care, but the creatures were gone. No footprints marred the soft earth. No blood stained the grass. Only the echoes of the night remained. Investigators would later examine the site, documenting the angles of gunfire, the timing of appearances, and the reported behaviors. Civilian UFO researchers meticulously mapped the movements, timing each sighting, cross-referencing accounts, noting consistencies and discrepancies. What they found was remarkable. Despite chaos, despite fear, despite darkness, the accounts held a persistent coherence. Was it owls, as skeptics suggested? Great horned owls, whose glowing eyes and silent flight could mimic small humanoid figures, perhaps. But the family's descriptions were consistent in a way that seemed almost preternatural mechanical movements, floating appearances, repeated returns. These details exceeded the ordinary, and yet the truth remained layered. Perhaps it was multiple explanations interweaving meteor streaks painting the sky with impossible color, a dog sensing something beyond human perception, owls gliding with uncanny silence, and human minds translating it all into narrative that made sense of fear. But even in hypothetical solutions, wonder persists. How does ordinary perception stretch to the extraordinary? How does fear sharpen detail without fabricating it entirely? How does a group experience something together, shaping a collective memory that will outlast the moment itself? Hopkinsville, the town, became inseparable from the event. Over the years, festivals celebrated the little green men, transforming fear into joy, spectacle into culture. Children ran in costumes, inflatable UFOs hovered in the sky, and the story's strangeness was recast as playful curiosity. Yet beneath the laughter and colorful decorations remained the resonance of that humid August night, something unseen and inexplicable brushing against the ordinary world. The legacy of shadows between the trees endures because it reminds us of something profound. Mystery exists not only in what is seen, but in what lingers in perception, memory, and imagination. Ordinary people encounter the extraordinary, and though answers remain elusive, the questions shape culture, reflection, and community identity. Even now, if one stands at the edge of the fields near where the farmhouse once stood, breathing in the still night air, listening to the cicadas and distant owls, one can imagine those long hours unfolding again. Shapes could glide through the trees, eyes could gleam where shadows bend, and hearts might quicken in recognition that the world is far larger than our daily routines suggest. The Hopkinsville night reminds us that silence, space, and observation have power. That curiosity and caution can coexist. That ordinary lives can intersect with the unexplained, and in doing so, leave a mark not on history alone, but on imagination itself. Sometimes, we think resolution is what makes a story endure, but here, it is the persistence of mystery, the shadows between the trees, the weight of unanswered questions that have kept the night alive in memory. Because every time someone glances up at a moonlit field, wonders about distant lights, or listens to the rustle of leaves in the darkness, they touch a fragment of that long August night in 1955. And in that touch, the story whispers again. The night waits patiently, and the shadows continue to move. Chapter 9. Through the eyes of the family, step inside the farmhouse once more, if you can, and imagine the air thick with the scent of summer warm wood, faint smoke from kerosene lamps, the earthy aroma of the yard seeping through cracks in the walls. The house is small, just 3 rooms, but alive with presence. The chatter of children playing earlier, the low hum of adults conversing, the occasional clatter of dishes. The evening had arrived like any other, yet something delicate had begun to thread itself through the ordinary. The first hint that this night would not be like the others. We often think of extraordinary events as viewed from a distance, from newsprint or history books, from the cold eyes of investigators or the practiced pens of skeptics. But what if you saw it through the eyes of the family who lived it? What if you felt their gaze darting to the darkened windows, their hearts quickening as unfamiliar sounds threaded into the familiar cadence of the farmhouse? That perspective is a universe apart from headlines. It is intimacy and tension, a dance of fear and attention that fills every corner of a home with the invisible weight of the unknown. Glennie Langford, the widow who had opened her home to her children and extended family, felt the first prickling sensation while sitting near the kitchen table, fingering a small handkerchief as she watched shadows lengthen against the walls. Her younger children, Lonnie, Charlton, and Mary, were clustered nearby, the playful voices fading as the dog began to bark outside. The bark was urgent, clipped, unfamiliar in its insistence. The children paused mid-motion, small bodies frozen, their eyes wide, ears straining to understand the shift in the world outside. Glennie's sons, Elmer Lucky and John Charlie. JC rose slowly, exchanging a glance that conveyed more than words could capture. Their wives, Vera and Aline, mirrored the tension, hands clasped tightly together, knuckles whitening. The evening's ordinary rhythm had splintered. Every creak in the floor, every rustle from beyond the porch, carried weight. It was a delicate, almost suspended attention, a heightened awareness that drew their senses outward, toward the open air of the backyard, toward the tree line that now seemed deeper and darker than usual. Billy Ray Taylor, visiting with his wife June, had returned from the well with the first sighting of the silvery streak across the sky. His voice, usually casual and bright, carried a tautness now, a vibration of disbelief and wonder. He gestured toward the horizon where the light had vanished, and a hush fell over the group. How do you explain something that defies every expectation you have of your world? That night, explanation could not arrive quickly. It could only stretch itself in time, coiling around thought and hesitation like the humid air that pressed against the skin. Then, as the family gathered near windows and doorways, they saw the first figure, not in a rush, not attacking, but moving deliberately with a swaying gait, large luminous eyes fixed upon them. It was small, roughly 3 feet tall, with arms that stretched in an uncanny manner and a head that seemed disproportionately large, catching the light in a silvery glimmer. Perhaps what unnerved them most was its persistence. There was nothing erratic in its movements, only an insistence on presence, an intention in the way it approached and receded. Imagine standing there, peering through the screened doorway, your pulse thudding as each step outside presses against your instinct for safety. Hands clutch the nearest object wood, tool, weapon, as you watch a figure that does not belong, and yet it does not rush or strike. It pauses, tilts its head as though considering, and then drifts sideways, returning just moments later, a slow, hypnotic rhythm that unspools tension like a string in your chest. For hours, the family experienced this ebb and flow. They fired weapons, not out of aggression, but instinct, a primal attempt to maintain control of their space. Each shot rang sharp against the quiet of the countryside, met with a metallic plink or a silence that carried its own weight. Some moments stretched into eternity, the glare of eyes at a window, the quiet pause before a shadow shifted among trees, the subtle glide of an arm across the porch in darkness. Yet, within this tension was a profound observation. The beings, though persistent, never forced their way inside. They seemed curious rather than predatory, studying rather than attacking. And the family, despite fear, recognized patterns. Shapes moved deliberately, often returning to the same positions, their forms almost mechanical in symmetry when reacting to gunfire, flipping backward and floating, untouched. There was something in that consistency, a language unspoken, that intrigued the human mind even as it tightened the chest with unease. The children, though hidden, perceived everything through small, quiet channels. Every creak, every swish, every glow caught their attention, etching memory like a careful artist brushing lines into paper. Adults felt responsibility magnified. They had to protect these young lives while navigating the uncanny, the inexplicable. Parents and guardians processed observation alongside defense, a dual rhythm of awareness that sharpened senses and stretched patience. Through the night, conversations were minimal, but charged. "Did you see that?" whispered one adult, and eyes flickered toward a corner where a shadow shifted, unsure if it was solid or imagined. The mind becomes a measuring tool in such moments, calculating angles, distance, risk, all while trying to process the impossible. Each family member's account would later confirm small details, the sway of a figure's walk, the glint of eyes, the subtle arc of retreat. And it is this multiplicity of perspective, this overlapping attention, that made the memory endure, beyond speculation, beyond the need for proof. By the time they left for Hopkinsville, exhaustion had settled into their bones, but awareness did not wane. The drive was quiet, the hum of the car blending with the night, punctuated only by the occasional reflection of headlights on the road. Officers met them at the station and saw not embellishment, but raw, palpably fear. Pulses doubled, voices trembled, hands gestured to explain shapes and movements that defied ordinary understanding. And yet, even amid reporting and reassurance, a strange calm had emerged on acceptance that what they had experienced was real. If only to them, this is what it feels like to see through the eyes of those 11 people. Not hysteria, not play acting, but an extraordinary attentiveness to something that does not conform to expectation. Ordinary life, in that moment bent around the edges of perception, creating a tableau that balanced on memory, instinct, and the faint thread of wonder that curiosity brings even in fear. Think, for a moment, of memory forming in real time, how fragile, how malleable, and yet how insistently detailed it can be when emotion presses upon it. Each heartbeat carries attention, each glance, calculation, each gasp, recording. In a quiet farmhouse in rural Kentucky, 11 observers became archivists of the extraordinary. Their home became a lens, the night a canvas, and whatever glided, paused, or reflected in the darkness became both subject and story. And it is here that imagination and observation converge. Perhaps the figures were something simple. Owls gliding in the moonlight, reflections bouncing across the yard, meteor streaks igniting wonder. Or perhaps there was something entirely unknown, slipping just outside the boundaries of understanding. Either possibility requires one to accept the limits of perception, the fluidity of memory, and the beauty of witness. In the end, through the eyes of the family, we learn more than what they saw. We learn how it felt, the stretch of tension, the rise and fall of hope and dread, the way silence itself became almost audible. How air carried weight and shadows carried meaning. We understand that in such moments, courage is quiet, curiosity is sharp, and presence is absolute. The farmhouse, the tree line, the yard, and the still August night were not just the backdrop. They were participants. They absorbed the gunfire, the footsteps, the quiet gasps, and the shimmering shapes outside the windows. And in their observation, they recorded what cannot be erased by skepticism, what cannot be diluted by time, a human encounter with something remarkable, unexplainable, and enduring. Long after dawn, when the family had fled, that night remained etched in their minds. It was an ordinary house transformed into the theater of the extraordinary, an ordinary neighborhood threaded with events that could not be easily categorized. Through their eyes, the story is intimate, fragile, hypnotic, a reminder that real experience often defies summary, that memory carries a resonance beyond explanation, and that the human heart is capable of both fear and awe in equal measure. And when we imagine it, we are drawn closer not to verification, not to proof, but to empathy. We stand beside them, hearts quickened, senses alert, and for a brief, shimmering moment, the ordinary world tilts, allowing us to feel what it means to witness the extraordinary. The night lingers, and the farmhouse holds its stories in the quiet spaces between shadows. Chapter 10. Shadows and Whispers. The night that had begun like any other stretched slowly across the fields, folding time into something soft and unmeasured. Darkness was no longer merely the absence of light. It was a living presence, draping itself over the farmhouse, brushing along the edges of the trees, weaving through the fields with an almost deliberate patience. The air, heavy with the scent of late summer, carried a warmth that pressed gently against the skin, mingling with the faint, sweet aroma of hay and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a cricket song resonated, steady and hypnotic, underscoring the quiet tension of a world poised on the edge of the extraordinary. Inside the small three-room farmhouse, the family moved with careful deliberation. Every step was measured. Every glance held intention. The dog, once protective, had taken refuge beneath the porch, trembling slightly, a silent witness to the shifting reality. Glennie Langford, his fingers lingered on the edge of the table, tracing the wood's worn grain as though grounding herself in something tangible. Her children, crouched in corners, or peeking cautiously through the dim light of kerosene lamps, held their breath at every sound. The scraping of leaves against windows, the subtle shift of shadows along the tree line. And then the whispers began, not voices from within the house, but subtle, deliberate sounds from beyond. The soft scuff of feet across the yard, the faint brush of something against the roof, the pause that felt heavier than a shout. They were the night's secret language, encoded in small movements and quiet vibrations, heard by those attuned to the edges of perception. Each whisper seemed to bend the familiar into the uncanny, and yet it was not chaos. It was careful, almost purposeful. Billy Ray Taylor was the first to notice the precise cadence of the movement outside. His eyes, trained from nights of carnival work, and long summer evenings under the stars, caught the flicker of light across something metallic or reflective in the distance. He whispered to Lucky Sutton, who was crouched near a window. Briefly an end. The two men shared a look that needed no words, a mixture of caution, disbelief, and the quiet insistence that they remain alert. Every instinct honed from years of rural living pressed them to interpret, to measure, to understand what lay beyond the threshold of their home. And then the figures appeared again. Not rushing, not hiding, but stepping into the thin glow cast by the lamps, pausing for the briefest moment to tilt their large, round eyes toward the family. Their bodies swayed with a fluid motion, almost as if walking through invisible water, arms stretching and retracting in subtle, deliberate arcs. There was no roar, no shout, no immediate threat, just the weight of observation. It was as if the world itself had taken a breath and held it, waiting for the next movement, the next signal from those within the house. The family's response was measured, but instinctive. Bullets rang out into the night, the sound sharp and echoing, met with a metallic plink that reverberated softly in the ears. Each shot was a punctuation mark in a sentence that the night itself seemed to write. But no figure fell, no shadow fractured completely, and the beings retreated just enough to maintain the rhythm of uncertainty. The dance continued, each approach and withdrawal folding time into a slow, hypnotic pulse that stretched hours into a single, sustained moment. Glennie's voice, soft and steady, guided the children to crouch lower, to remain visible only in glances. "Stay calm," she whispered, though calm was a fragile cloak. Her eyes scanned the shifting darkness, seeking patterns, connections, anything to anchor the mind in logic and instinct. And the children, sensing both fear and determination, absorbed the atmosphere, their small bodies pressed into corners of safety, learning the language of attention, of measured silence, of quiet vigilance. Outside, the figures glided across the yard again, their forms catching fragments of moonlight or, perhaps reflecting none at all, emerging from the shadows like living shapes made of dusk itself. Their motion was precise, almost deliberate. The tilt of a head, the forward reach of a limb, the subtle sway of their bodies conveying an intelligence, a purpose that neither demanded explanation nor provoked immediate comprehension. It was observation distilled into form, as if the night itself had taken shape and moved through space to study the family within. Time became something fluid. Minutes stretched, contracted, and reformed into a continuum of attention and sensation. The sound of footsteps, the scrape of claws, the faint glint of light on silvery skin. These became markers of rhythm, rather than discrete events. The family existed in the intervals between perception, aware of what they could see and what they could not, balancing between instinctive response and the mesmerizing pull of curiosity. And still, questions multiplied in the quiet. Why did they return again and again? Why did bullets fail to halt their approach? Why did the dog, protective by nature, flee instead of growl? Each unanswered question hung in the humid air, mingling with the scent of earth and wood smoke, forming a tapestry of uncertainty that demanded both attention and reflection. As hours passed, small details imprinted themselves into memory with vivid clarity. The way the light refracted off the figures' bodies, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The sway of arms that mirrored the undulating grass beyond the porch. The silent arc of a head that suggested recognition or study. It was not horror. It was fascination tempered with vigilance, a delicate balance between awe and responsibility. The family's cohesion became their anchor. Each movement coordinated, each glance acknowledged. Communication became subtle, a nod, a shift in posture, a quiet gesture. The adults shielded the children not only physically but perceptually, guiding their attention, monishing fear and sustaining courage. In this intimate choreography, the farmhouse became both refuge and observatory, a stage for the unfolding narrative that defied ordinary explanation. And then the night deepened. Shadows stretched further, folding into themselves, hiding shapes that may have been real or imagined. The wind whispered through the trees, brushing leaves against the roof and walls, adding another layer to the chorus of uncertainty. Inside, the family adjusted, attuned to nuances. The faintest change in shadow, the softest glint of reflected light, the rhythm of silence that punctuated the occasional metallic plink of distant bullets. Each sensory note reinforced the reality of the moment, even as understanding remained elusive. At some point, exhaustion pressed against the edges of attention. Hands grew heavier, breaths slowed, and yet the mind remained alert, scanning, interpreting, translating movement into meaning. There is a strange clarity in such tension, a heightened acuity born not of danger alone but of profound awareness. The family became instruments of perception, attuned to shifts that might escape casual notice. The sway of a limb, the pause in a step, the glimmer of a reflective surface. Through it all, the beings maintained their rhythm, neither aggressive nor completely absent. Their persistence created a quiet dialogue, one that did not rely on words but on presence, on motion, on shared space between observer and observed. And in that dialogue, the family began to understand something essential. It was not simply confrontation or fear. They were witnessing, participating, and remembering simultaneously. Each movement outside, each shadow cast across the porch, became a marker in the story that memory would preserve long after the night ended. By the early hours of morning, the pattern began to shift. Movements grew less frequent, pauses stretched longer, and the rhythm of the night yielded to a creeping calm. The family remained vigilant, yet the sharp edge of tension softened, replaced with a quiet attentiveness, a lingering sense of presence that carried both wonder and relief. And when the sun finally touched the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue across fields and tree line, the house stood in gentle silence. The echoes of the night's whispers, the soft metallic plinks, the sway of shadowed forms all receded into memory. The experience, vivid and intricate, had folded itself into the layers of the family's shared narrative. Through their eyes, the world had expanded and contracted, ordinary and extraordinary entwined. They had seen, felt, and recorded not only shapes and light, but the profound human response to the unknown. It was a story written not in ink, but in attention, in breath, in the rhythm of quiet hearts and vigilant senses. And long after the farmhouse emptied, when doors closed and wheels carried them toward Hopkinsville, those shadows lingered not as fearsome invaders, but as reminders that the ordinary can shift into something remarkable with the mere presence of the unseen. Even now, the whispers of that night can be imagined in the spaces between trees, in the folds of quiet fields, in the lingering scent of summer air. Chapter 11. Across the fields of memory, the farmhouse had emptied, leaving behind only the soft imprint of lives once lived within its walls. The floors still held the faint scent of kerosene lamps, of cooked meals, of small hands brushing against the table legs, and worn wooden furniture. And yet, more than scent or shadow, the space preserved the echo of attention, of every cautious step, every whispered warning, every glance cast toward the tree line where the unknown had hovered. Time in that place no longer felt like linear hours. It had folded, stretched, and settled into something almost tangible, a resonance that could linger in memory like sunlight on dust. As the family drove away toward Hopkinsville, the fields stretched endlessly on either side, glowing faintly in the first touch of dawn. Mist hung low over the land, softening lines, blending fence posts with cornfields, blending imagination with perception. Each person in the vehicles carried more than fatigue. They carried the story, stitched together from fear, curiosity, and something ineffably strange. Silent glances passed between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Did anyone else truly see the same thing? Did anyone understand what had transpired? And yet, it was not fear alone that stayed with them. There was a subtle, profound sense of having participated in something that reached beyond the ordinary. A night where the world seemed to tilt slightly, where shadows gained weight and light carried intention. These memories, layered over the familiar routines of farm life, would become a private lexicon of wonder and vigilance. In the days that followed, the farmhouse became a hub of stories, but also of absence. When neighbors passed by, they might glimpse the empty windows or the quiet porch, and yet the place was transformed not by visible change, but by implication. The family's ordeal had painted the ordinary landscape with questions, filling the hills and fields with unseen weight. Even a simple walk through the yard would stir memory. The soft scrape of leaves along a window, the glint of metal in darkness, the swaying rhythm of a small, strange figure just beyond the edge of perception. Newspapers carried the story quickly, their words drifting across counties and into distant towns. Some accounts were precise, almost clinical. Measurements, timelines, witness statements. Others leaned into the sensational, embellishing shapes, adding color where none had been described, imagining voices, and layering fear into the narrative. And in all of them, the farmhouse remained at the center, not as a building, but as a stage for human attention, where ordinary people faced something extraordinary and returned, physically unharmed, but irrevocably changed in perception. With each retelling, the story grew, yet the heart of it remained rooted in the family's experience. Observers could debate, skeptics could hypothesize, but the core remained a night of careful watching, of measured vigilance, and of a slow, deliberate dance between the known and unknown. Memory held on to the cadence of the hours, the sway of shadowed forms, the faint metallic blinks, the arc of arms that seemed to defy simple explanation. Even for those who were not present, the narrative carried weight. In Hopkinsville, curiosity bloomed quietly in the minds of residents. Farmers returning home from early chores would glance at the fields and the tree line, imagining shapes in the morning mist. Children, hearing whispers of the story from parents or older siblings, would gaze at the sky with subtle wonder, their imaginations calibrated by tailies of glowing eyes and floating figures. The family's own recollections began to take shape in more deliberate forms. Maps were drawn, lines and angles marked where lights had appeared. Timelines were sketched across notebook pages, connecting movement and reaction with careful attention. Each note, each measurement, was an attempt to hold on to the precision of memory against the slow erosion of time. And through it all, one fact remained unaltered. No figure had been captured, no trace of a landing, no physical proof beyond bullet marks, a few scuffed boards, and the heavy impression left on human attention. Psychologists later would call this the power of observation and group perception. When multiple witnesses experience the same event, their memories converge, creating a consistency that often feels irrefutable to those involved. Yet in this case, the convergence did not produce certainty, it produced layers. Each layer added subtlety. Small motions, hesitant approaches, moments of retreat. The night became a composition of sensory and emotional impressions, each one reinforcing the sense of an intelligence beyond ordinary measure. Across the fields, in the spaces where moonlight had once refracted on glimmering surfaces, nature seemed to hold its breath. The wind carried no more whispers, but its movement through trees and grasses reminded the family of what had transpired. The dog, once frightened into hiding, now followed cautiously, ears twitching at subtle sounds that had once been mundane. Animals, like humans, had their own awareness, their own responses, which in retrospect could have mirrored the unmeasured perception of the strange visitors. Months passed, and the community began to notice subtle changes in the family. There was a quiet vigilance in their eyes, a hesitancy to dismiss the unseen, a deeper attention to movement in shadows. Conversations began to include cautious references, a flash of light across a field, a sound that seemed slightly out of rhythm, a motion in the dark that could not be explained. Memory had folded the extraordinary into the ordinary, creating a lens through which even mundane life held hints of possibility. For the family, the act of remembering became ritual. They would recount the night in hushed tones around the table, not for entertainment, but to preserve the texture of attention. Each description added subtle layers. The tilt of a head, the sway of a body, the sound of footsteps over dry leaves. They did not speak of fear alone, they spoke of awareness, of the subtle choreography of perception that had held them together, that had allowed them to navigate hours of uncertainty with precision and care. And in those reflections, questions never fully resolved themselves. Could the visitors have been owls? Could the movement of wind through the tree line have created illusions? Could the reflections of light have transformed simple shapes into figures of intent? Perhaps. Yet the texture of experience, the rhythm of interaction, and the consistency of human attention suggested something more subtle, something that defied easy explanation. The fields themselves seemed to hold memory. Anyone walking at twilight could sense the way light shifted over the grass, the slow cadence of shadows stretching across uneven soil, the faint rustle of leaves that seemed almost aware of their own presence. The land became an echo chamber, preserving impressions, not as evidence, but as suggestion, a gentle imprint of something witnessed once and remembered deeply. And as years turned to decades, the narrative expanded outward. Researchers arrived, notebooks in hand, tracing the paths described by the family. Amateur astronomers charted skies, cross-referencing meteor showers and celestial events. Skeptics debated, proposing logical explanations. Believers speculated, imagining intelligence and curiosity beyond earthly measure. And through it all, the family's memory remained a steady spine, a central line connecting chaos to coherence. The night of the encounter became a quiet mirror of human attention. It revealed not only what could be seen, but how perception shaped experience. It illustrated how a group, attentive and observant, could navigate a night of uncertainty and emerge with a story that neither confirmed or denied the extraordinary. It was a lesson in patience, in noticing, in the subtle calibration of senses against the unknown. Even now, when the wind moves across the fields, or when the moon casts long shadows through trees, one can imagine the echoes of that night. The sway of bodies in the darkness, the glint of reflective eyes, the metallic plink against boards all become part of the subtle rhythm of the land. Memory and imagination intertwine, creating a bridge between ordinary life and the moment when perception opened to something extraordinary. And for the family, and for those who would later visit or study the event, the lesson was quietly enduring. Not all mysteries demand resolution. Some are preserved in observation, in attention, in the delicate layering of sensory detail and human awareness. The fields and the farmhouse, though physically changed, carried the resonance of that night, a slow, measured echo that could be read not only in words, but in movement, in shadow, in breath held at the edge of the ordinary. Time stretches differently when memory carries the weight of the unseen, and as decades passed, curiosity rippled outward, carrying whispers across generations and fields alike. Chapter 12. The Festival of Shadows and Light. Time has a curious way of reshaping events. What once pressed heavily upon a family in the dark, silent fields of Kentucky could, decades later, become a source of collective memory, of shared ritual, and even of celebration. The farmhouse no longer stood, replaced by quiet grass and the slow growth of trees. But the story, the strange, luminous story of one long night, had taken root in the hearts of the town. It had grown in unexpected ways, folding itself into the rhythm of life in Hopkinsville and the surrounding countryside. In the early 1980s, whispers of commemoration began, not solemn monuments, not statues with plaques, but small gatherings, where curiosity and playfulness intertwined. Locals would meet at community halls, schools, and parks, recalling the details of the night, often laughing at themselves while still honoring the weight of the experience. The tales told by the family had matured into folklore not diminished, but enriched by retelling. By the turn of the millennium, the celebration had evolved into something tangible. The Little Green Men Days Festival, held annually in August, near the anniversary of the encounter. It became a tapestry of local culture, history, and imagination. Streets once quiet with fields and farmland, now pulsed with music, laughter, and the faint hum of electricity carrying through tents and stages. The festival transformed the ordinary townscape into a place where shadows and light could mingle freely, where every corner seemed to whisper of the extraordinary that had once occurred just a few miles away. The festival was not about fear anymore. It had become an exercise in curiosity, an invitation to notice the small details that often go overlooked in daily life. Inflatable UFOs bobbed gently above stages, reflecting sunlight in a dance of soft colors. Children wore green costumes, their oversized eyes and playful movements echoing. In miniature, the mysterious figures described decades before. Adults traced their fingers along maps of the original farmhouse location, pointing out where windows had been shot through, where shadows had stretched across walls, where the yard had seemed to sway under unseen weight. There were parades, too, slow and deliberate, as if the town itself had learned patience from the event it commemorated. Floats painted in silver and green carried representations of the visitors, not grotesque or frightening, but curious and observing, floating in silent choreography above the streets. Musicians played rhythms that mimicked the sway of the figures in memory slow, repeating patterns that invited listeners to imagine movement, tension, and stillness all at once. Workshops emerged. Small rooms filled with children and adults alike, making models of spaceships, drawing imaginative interpretations of the glowing eyes, or attempting to recreate the shimmer described in the original account. Storytellers would gather around evening bonfires or park stages, recounting the night not as terror, but as a study in wonder. They emphasized attention to detail, the rhythm of observation, the interplay between fear and curiosity, between expectation and the unknown. Local businesses joined in with a kind of gentle enthusiasm. Cafes served alien-themed pastries, their green icing a nod to the legend. Bookstores displayed accounts of the encounter alongside general works on astronomy and natural science. Even the high school marching band composed a small piece that was played each year, its notes rising and falling like the arcs of the unknown figures, creating a soundtrack for imagination. But beyond the playful elements, the festival carried the weight of reflection. For those who had lived through the night, or for their descendants, there was still a measure of respect embedded in the event. Geraldine Sutton Stith, who had become a guardian of the memory, often appeared as a speaker, recounting the night in calm, precise detail. Her storytelling emphasized not monsters or hoaxes, but attention, awareness, and the human capacity to observe carefully under strange conditions. She reminded attendees that the event had not been a performance, not a hoax. It had been lived, hour by hour, in real time. With all the uncertainty and courage that the unknown demands, visitors came from across the United States, drawn by curiosity, by the chance to step into a landscape where reality and imagination had once collided. Some arrived seeking proof of extraterrestrial life, others seeking only to understand human perception, while still others came to witness the layers of culture that had formed around a single night of observation. Every festival became a convergence point of science, psychology, folklore, and playful wonder, a living reminder that a single experience can ripple across generations, leaving impressions that are both concrete and intangible. The festival also encouraged quiet reflection. A section of the park was dedicated to the night sky itself. Telescopes set up for observing constellations, meteor showers, and the movement of celestial bodies. Children learned to notice the subtle shifts in light, the patterns that repeat over time, the way perception can be sharpened by patience and attention. Adults found themselves watching the same skies, recalling the long August night of 1955, imagining the way light and shadow could transform ordinary shapes into figures of curiosity and uncertainty. For many, the festival became a meditation on the nature of observation. It asked questions quietly. How do we perceive the world around us? How do memory, expectation, and emotion shape what we see? What happens when multiple people share a moment of uncertainty and attention? These were not questions answered by exhibits or costumes. They were questions invited by experience, by walking slowly through fields and tents, by tracing one's own attention along shadows, by listening to the soft laughter of children, pretending to be observers of the unknown. Even local educators incorporated the story into lessons, not as a tale of aliens, but as a study in human cognition, community history, and cultural memory. Students traced the sequence of events, measured distances on maps, calculated timing, and examined the relationship between perception and context. Through this, the story gained a second life, became a way to teach attention, empathy, and the value of careful observation. And yet, despite decades of festivals, exhibits, and playful reenactments, the night remained untamed in memory. No photograph, no model, no diagram could ever capture the precise sway of the beings, the faint metallic sound of bullets striking, the way the children had huddled silently in the corner while adults moved with measured caution. The story retained its edges, its unanswered questions, its gentle strangeness. It was a night remembered not for resolution, but for the subtle choreography of attention, courage, and perception. The festival also became a bridge between generations. Grandparents who had heard the story directly from those present now guided children along paths of imagination and history. Families traced the outlines of the farmhouse, pieced together the angles of approach, and recreated movements in gentle play. The story became a tool for connection, not just for curiosity linking memory, attention, and imagination across time. Even as the festival grew, its organizers were careful to preserve the essence of the original experience. Lights were soft. Sounds were gentle. Movement was deliberate. The event never sought to frighten. It sought to engage, to invite attention, to cultivate a sense of wonder. It became a festival of shadows and light, where the ordinary world could briefly tilt into the extraordinary without forcing anyone to confront terror. And in this, the festival carried a subtle lesson. Curiosity, when nurtured, can transform fear into engagement. Attention can transform uncertainty into wonder. Memory, when honest, becomes a bridge between past and present, between what is known and what might be. The story of the night in Hopkinsville had moved from private terror to public celebration, yet it remained grounded in observation, in detail, in the measured heartbeat of those who had lived it. Perhaps that is why the encounter continues to resonate, not because it proved anything, not because it required belief, but because it demonstrates the human capacity to notice, to engage, and to share. The fields may have been empty, the farmhouse may have been gone, yet the story, the cadence of attention, the rhythm of uncertainty, the glow of unseen eyes, and for those who walked the festival grounds, whether as resident or visitor, it offered a subtle invitation to notice the small, quiet details of the world, to consider the interplay of light and shadow, to reflect on what it means to perceive carefully, and to imagine what might lie just beyond the edge of certainty. The Little Green Men Days Festival was not a memorial. It was a living, breathing continuation of the night's rhythm, a rhythm of observation, attention, and curiosity that spanned decades. In balloons and banners, in workshops and music, in telescopes and quiet storytelling, the night persisted. It persisted not as proof or spectacle, but as memory made tangible, as wonder made communal, as attention made art. And when the festival ended, when crowds dispersed and fields returned to quiet, when the tents folded and lights dimmed, the echo of that night lingered, still soft, subtle, persistent. It lived in the rhythm of footsteps across grass, in the slight rustle of leaves against windows, in the way attention could stretch slowly into the dark. It reminded everyone, gently, that mystery is not something to be conquered. Mystery is something to be witnessed, measured, imagined, and shared. And in those moments of shared attention, across time and space, the night of 1955 lived on. And as the festival lights dimmed, the night sky above Hopkinsville remained unchanged, waiting for the next observer to wonder, quietly, at what might still be out there. Chapter 13. Reflections in the Quiet Sky. After decades of retelling, festivals, books, and interviews, the story of the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter rests not in headlines or exhibits, but in the quiet spaces between thought and memory. The farmhouse is gone, the fields have grown, and the roads carry modern traffic. Yet the night of August 21st, 1955, persists in a different form, as reflection, as question, as a gentle reminder that human experience cannot always be neatly catalogued or explained. If you stand in the countryside now, where the farmhouse once stood, the stillness is remarkable. The wind moves through the trees, carrying the same soft rustle the family would have heard decades ago. The moonlight spills across fields, and shadows stretch in ways that might, for a fleeting moment, suggest movement where there is none. It is easy to imagine figures gliding silently, not with menace, but with curiosity, observing, fleeting and weightless, their eyes catching the glint of light like tiny stars suspended in the dark. In this reflection, the story becomes less about proving or disproving and more about understanding. What does it mean that 11 people, neighbors, family, young and old, witnessed something that defied ordinary explanation? What does it mean that fear and attention, observation and imagination converged so perfectly on a humid August night to create a memory so vivid it endures? These questions do not require answers. They invite contemplation. They allow the mind to stretch across time, imagining not only what might have been seen, but what it felt like to see it. Consider the adults. In the house, they were practical people, accustomed to the rhythms of rural life. They had faced the challenges of farming, of raising children, of long nights without electricity. And yet, in that extraordinary moment, They experienced uncertainty like few ever do. Their response was measured, cautious, human. To observe, to act, to protect their family. They fired guns, not in recklessness, but in instinct. They barricaded doors, shielded children, and kept watch in the darkness, each heartbeat echoing the tension of a world temporarily unmade. And the children, they huddled quietly, wide-eyed, listening, learning. In those moments, they witnessed courage, uncertainty, and wonder in equal measure. Perhaps they felt fear, but they also absorbed the careful attention of adults who, despite not understanding the phenomena, acted with care and intention. It is in that interplay of observation and emotion that the encounter becomes timeless, echoing beyond the night itself into the very nature of human experience. Even now, one can imagine them looking through windows, trying to discern shapes in the dark. Every flicker of light, every swaying shadow, every subtle shift in the trees could have been interpreted as a figure, a presence. And in that interpretation lies the profound lesson of the story. That perception is never neutral. It is shaped by expectation, emotion, context, and history. It is as much about the observer as it is about the observed. Across the decades, the story found new forms. Festival balloons, alien costumes, workshops, and books ensured it lived beyond memory. Researchers studied timelines, measured distances, debated natural explanations, and extraordinary possibilities. Skeptics cited owls and meteor showers, highlighting the plausible. Believers honored testimony, emphasizing consistency and sincerity. Both perspectives have merit, and both continue to shape the conversation. And perhaps the truest insight lies not in choosing one over the other, but in recognizing that the story exists in the space between certainty and doubt, where imagination and reality meet. The Hopkinsville skies themselves seem unchanged. Stars rotate slowly overhead. Clouds drift. The wind whispers. And yet, when one pauses long enough, listening closely, one might feel a subtle resonance with the past, a trace of anticipation, the memory of movement, the echo of eyes watching from the dark. It is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it lingers. It is the essence of the encounter. Quiet, persistent, and profoundly human. Family descendants continue to honor the memory, not as spectacle, but as legacy. Geraldine Sutton Stiths speaks gently but firmly about what happened, emphasizing the lived experience over sensationalism. Her words carry the weight of history, yet they are suffused with calm. A reminder that wonder need not be loud to endure, that the unknown need not terrify to matter, and her commitment bridges generations, teaching that stories, when told with care, become instruments of reflection, empathy, and curiosity. In the quiet of a modern Hopkinsville night, one can still imagine the family on that porch, the bullets lodged in wood, the creatures hovering at the edge of perception. One can imagine their steady breath, the slow movement of bodies attuned to each sound, the careful dance of observation that defined that long night. And in that imagination, the story persists not as proof, not as hoax, but as an invitation to look, to notice, to wonder. There is also a subtle lesson about the way communities engage with mystery. Where fear once dominated, curiosity now thrives. Where isolation once intensified tension, collective memory has nurtured connection. The festival, the museum exhibits, the stories shared in classrooms and homes, all of these represent a human effort to grapple with the unknown in ways that respect experience without demanding belief. Mystery becomes a mirror, reflecting not only what may exist in the sky, but what exists within us. Our courage, our attention, our capacity to perceive, and our willingness to wonder. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter is this: that ordinary people, living quiet lives in a rural landscape, faced something extraordinary without preparation or expectation, and their memory of it endured. They did not invent a narrative. They experienced it. They did not seek fame. They experienced it. And they did not demand belief. They simply bore witness. In this, the story teaches a subtle but profound truth. The unknown is not always meant to terrify. Sometimes it is meant to teach attention. Sometimes it is meant to invite reflection. Sometimes it is meant to remind us that the universe is larger, subtler, and stranger than we might imagine. And so, the night of August 21st, 1955, continues to exist in quiet spaces, in the hearts of descendants, in the archives of newspapers and research, in the folds of festival tents, in the soft hum of evening wind through Kentucky fields. It is a story without a definitive conclusion, but that is its enduring power. The absence of resolution does not diminish it. It enriches it. The unanswered questions become part of the narrative, encouraging observation, reflection, and imagination. Perhaps, then, the ultimate gift of the encounter is not in proving what was seen, but in teaching how to see, how to attend to the world with care, how to listen to the subtle movements of shadow and light, how to honor memory without needing to control it. That is a lesson that transcends time, that bridges generations, and that invites every observer, in their own way, to step gently into the unknown. And so, when you find yourself beneath the quiet August sky, or when moonlight stretches across your windowpane, consider the quiet possibility that the world is more mysterious than it appears. Notice the shapes, the glimmers, the soft movements that might otherwise be overlooked. Pause for a moment. Breathe. Attend. Wonder. Because the night is patient. It holds its secrets softly. It waits for those willing to look, to imagine, to remember. And in that patient darkness, the spirit of Hopkinsville lingers ever present, ever calm, ever inviting us to see a little more, and to wonder a little longer. And as the quiet sky deepens, the story settles gently into memory, leaving behind the soft echo of eyes, light, and the enduring wonder of a single long night, the last whisper of the night. And so, our journey through that humid Kentucky night comes to its gentle close. The farmhouse stands no longer. The fields have shifted with time, and yet the story remains, carried forward in whispers, in memory, in the soft folding of night across the land. It is not a story of proof or disproof, nor a tale that demands belief. It is a story of attention, of presence, of ordinary people encountering something that stretched the boundaries of their understanding. Think of the family that night huddled in a small house, listening to the rustle of leaves, the scratching atop the roof, the soft glow of eyes that seemed not hostile but endlessly curious. They did not know what they were seeing. They could not name it. And yet, in that uncertainty, they learned something about themselves, about vigilance, about courage, and about the fragile, shimmering border between the known and the unknown. The night itself, the sky above Hopkinsville, is patient. It does not rush. It does not demand explanation. It waits quietly and steadily for the moments when human curiosity pauses long enough to notice, to imagine, to wonder. That is the enduring magic of the encounter. It does not offer answers, but it teaches observation. It does not insist on belief, but it nurtures reflection. It does not end with the resolution, but it lives on, as soft as the hum of insects, as weightless as shadows drifting across the fields. Perhaps the most remarkable part is that the story still speaks, across decades, across festivals, across books, across conversations held quietly in bedrooms and around kitchen tables. It reaches outward, inviting us all to contemplate the possibilities hidden in the world around us, to question, to notice, to wonder. And as you settle into your own night, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind drifts along the currents of imagination, remember these. Not every story asks to be solved. Some stories exist simply to remind us to pause, to observe, and to breathe in the quiet mystery of the world. Some stories exist to hold a space where curiosity can stretch, where wonder can linger, and where the soft whisper of the unknown can echo gently, endlessly, across the quiet sky. Close your eyes, listen to the night, and let yourself imagine, because somewhere, over the fields of Kentucky, the spirit of that long August night still drifts, weightless and patient, inviting every watcher to look a little closer, to wonder a little longer, and to remember that the world is always larger than it seems. And now, with the night drawing its curtain, the echoes of Hopkinsville rest softly in memory, leaving only the quiet, enduring invitation to gaze upward and dream.